Can you see it? Yes. Greetings, greetings, and welcome to another episode of Adis- welcome to another episode of Women and Resistance. Um, we've had technical issues, and hopefully, we're not having any other. And I am your host, Adesoji Ginla, and with me, as usual, is Ayafubere and Elias Choir. And tonight, we're looking at the lives and times of Amy Jack Garvey. And welcome. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So, first question would be, who was Amy Jack Garvey?
Well, it's a simple enough question, but it's one that that you don't quite frequently get asked in that way. Who are you? How do you start describing what you look like, or what do you say? But I will try to give you some background information about who I was, what I did. Um, Because when you study things, you want to study them in context. You want to understand the culture and the other things that were happening, even geopolitically, that could have been impactful, because none of us really exists in a bubble, right? So I was born into a middle class to upper middle class family in Jamaica.
Okay.
And I was born on December 31st, 1895. And my father was a printer, a very well-to-do man. My father was George Samuel Jack, and my mother was Charlotte Henrietta Jack. And she was very well educated. My mother happened to be of mixed race. So she had black and Scottish, a white parent as well. And I was raised in this middle class mixed family where, um, as I will tell you later, color was very important. But also your pedigree, your upbringing was also very important. I attended St. Patrick's School. My father was a staunch Anglican.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also attended the Deaconess Home School. It's now called St. Hugh's High School.
Okay.
And I also attended the Walmer's Girls' School. I was very well educated for women, girls of my time. And this was to come in handy because unfortunately, my father passed away when I was still a young girl. But I was able to parlay my education to work for a law firm. I
Hmm.
did legal work
Okay.
and helped to sustain myself and my family, although my father had been such an astute businessman that he had built up his estate where he left an inheritance for my mother and for his children, including me.
Hmm.
So I worked in this legal office, developing administrative and analytical skills that I believe were very
Important.
impactful
Mhm.
in the work that I was later to do, which of course I did not know I would do at that time. Well, it so happens that there was a young man named Marcus Garvey, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was also from Jamaica. I didn't know any thing of him when I lived in Jamaica. It's quite possible that because and understand the context when I say this, because we did not come from the same pedigree. He did not come from the same kind of family. He did not have the same kind of fortunes or even a career path like what I and those of my what I say, those in my social strata, if you will,
Right.
had. And so I did not make acquaintance of him in Jamaica like Amy Ashwood did. Of course, you know that Marcus Garvey was much darker skinned than I am. And I'll tell you a quick story. I digress really quickly to tell you this quick story. So this was after we had returned from the U.S. to Jamaica, and I'd had our two sons, and I was pushing one of our sons in the pram. I don't know what term you call it in the UK or in the US, but
It's
you
push.
have the baby in the
Yeah, the
thing
pusher.
and you push them. Okay. I think the Americans call it a stroller.
Stroller.
Okay.
Okay.
So an old classmate who hadn't seen me in so long. She saw me as we were both walking and she greeted me warmly. And we are catching up on the side of the road. And she says, "But whose black baby is this that you are pushing around?"
Mm.
Because Julius took after his father's complexion. And in that instant, I was reminded of the colorism issues we had then that still unfortunately persist till today.
Mm.
Um, at any rate, in 1917, I was part of a wave of West Indians and specifically Jamaicans who were moving from Jamaica to the United States. I took a 3 month leave from my job and I said, I'm going to visit the United States of America. And if things don't work out, I will be back.
Okay.
And but when I got there, I happened to attend a program, and the speaker was Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And oh my goodness, what a captivating speaker he was. And what he was talking about absolutely was something that lit a fire in me. He was talking along the lines of things that I had thought myself, um, but didn't quite have an avenue to express it.
Mm.
And now Amy Ashwood will tell the story that I had fallen on hard times while I was in the US and I had been evicted from my apartment, and that she's the one who introduced me to Marcus, and he felt sorry for me and gave me a job as a personal assistant to Amy Ashwood. Yeah, I tell a slightly different story, but nonetheless, um, Mr. Garvey, Marcus came to see that I had some skills that could be beneficial to his wife and to the movement, the UNIA. And so he did hire me as her assistant and we did become friends. In fact, I will put it out because I know that there's some of your listeners who might want to bring this up as an issue. Um, I was actually a bridesmaid in her marriage to the Honorable Marcus Garvey
Interesting.
in 1919. And it is not for me to say what did or did not happen with their union. I had nothing to do with it. Um, I was very fastidious with the work that I had been assigned to do. But it soon became clear to those of us in the inner circle that all was not well with the marriage. And um, by 1920, Mr. Garvey had moved out of their marital home. Of course, Amy Ashwood accused me of being the cause of their problems. And that that accusation does not even warrant a response on my part. Um, Needless to say, Marcus Garvey and I, after the annulment of their marriage, did eventually marry in 1922. Um, and Unfortunately, Amy Ashwood continued to contend that she was the legal wife. She actually tried to get my marriage to Marcus annulled, but of course, I was his legal wife and remained so until my death. As a matter of fact, I transitioned on the 51st anniversary of our wedding. So on the same date that we got married, 51
Mm.
years later, was the day that I made my transition. But just a little bit more about me. I think what might be helpful
Okay.
is to share um, some excerpts from an interview. The last major interview that I did was with a delightful young man, Emery J. Tolbert, who was um, writing a dissertation on the UNIA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he came to spend time with me, and he included quite a bit of our interview in his dissertation that eventually became published. And so I think it's helpful as you try to understand who I am and what I stood for and continue to stand for to hear my own words as I spoke them myself. So
Please, please go ahead.
there were two petitions, one in 1922, the year we got married, and one in 1929, to the then League of Nations, asking that the organization, through its convention, give a mandate to the UNIA over the former German colonies of Southwest Africa.
Mm.
The Persian delegate presented the petition on behalf of the UNIA because the UNIA wasn't a government and had not the privilege of presenting their own petition under the regulations governing the League of Nations. When the officials of the League of Nations saw that the thing had to be received and the far reaching effect that it would have in breaking down this imperialism in African colonial rule, they changed the regulation governing the presentation of petitions to the League so that when the petition went back again, the ruling was that the petition would have to come through the country from which the people who presented it originated, thereby killing the whole thing. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying.
Yes, 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 yes. So they, which means the petitioners would have had to been born or been descendants of Namibia, which is what is now known. So, but quick question prior to that is, were they aware of the massacre in Namibia at that time?
Of course, we kept touch with all things happening to Africans across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
You must know that the UNIA to date is the most successful Pan Africanist organization that has existed. We had members in every major continent. So, yes, we were aware,
Mm.
and what we were looking to do was for Black people, African people, to be in charge of their own affairs.
Okay.
So, we do not need Germany to colonize our people.
Mm.
If the issue is that they lack ability to self govern, then we other Black people can go and assist with that. Now, I know some of you will have some reservations because we see what happened in Liberia. And that, do I have a story to tell you about Liberia? But let me read a little bit more and then I will tell you that story. Remind me if I forget, my son. Always remember that white superiority is not just in America crushing the Black minority. It is an international, closely knot system born, I think, of the fear of the white people that if they give the Black people all over the world world a chance to develop by themselves and for themselves, they would be in jeopardy.
Mm.
And that is exemplified by the fact that after these wars where they fought among themselves, both the Asians and the Africans and the people in the diaspora have come into their own to speak. Not fully, but at least they have made big steps forward. Today at the United Nations, you have, this was back in 1973, I was saying this, you have 40 Black states represented. That is a demonstration of Garvey's goal for Black people, you see.
Okay.
Black nationhood. Africa redeemed. Almost all of it has been redeemed. And what isn't redeemed now is being fought for to be redeemed. So, therefore, the prophet has come into his own, and the activist work is being carried on by others. The
Okay.
ideals of the UNIA never died. So, let me quickly tell you this story about Liberia.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
From 1920, Garvey, my husband, sent a commissioner to explore conditions in Liberia because at this time, Liberia was in debt and the American government refused to loan any more money to Liberia. You might want to pause and ask, how was the country already in debt and to whom?
Hmm. Good question. Please proceed. Yes.
The American librarians did nothing really to develop the resources of the country. So I'm talking about those Black Americans who migrated to,
Liberia.
to Liberia. So Garvey sent a mission because the idea was, how do we develop the resources to make the economy viable? The commissioner negotiated and went over the cities located where mining could be done because of coal and agriculture. Oh, there was so much wild rubber without even being cultivated. It was all over the place. There was so much cultivating to be done in the food line because that's important in feeding a nation.
Sure. Correct.
You see? So some experts were sent over, and President King of Liberia himself organized the whole committee to meet with him. We said to the members of UNIA, nobody was allowed to move, to repatriate, to become a pioneer in Liberia unless he had some skill, some education, or some money so that he could start and develop something. Africa did not need another hungry mouth. Africa needed people who would come and do the work.
Mm.
So everything was properly organized. And of course, by the time 1924 came, we had bought a ship. The UNIA had bought a ship. And I want to say right here now that the whole slander and slogan about back to Africa was a slander on the movement because Garvey often said, some of you here in America and the West Indies are no damned good to the places where you live. You're no damned good to yourselves. Who wants you in Africa? The idea was to develop Africa, not to have a bunch of tramps going to lay down under a tree and not work. So it was no back to Africa, no mass migration at all. In fact, that is impractical and stupid. Garvey was not an impractical man. He's not a stupid man. He's a realist, you understand?
Okay.
And a man who saw the future and planned for it. So he talked with the king. We had a committee. A ship was bought, resources put together. And when we now went back to finalize the plans with the king in Liberia. Do you know what he did? Would you
Go on.
like to know what he did?
Yes, please.
France was concerned about this act of unity. The United States was concerned. Many of these Western countries were concerned. So Mr. Firestone went to Liberia,
Okay.
and the Liberian leader took those very ideas that a committee we had jointly set up had come up with experts and all of that. And he leased 1 million acres of land to Firestone for them to extract as much rubber as they want to and treat the people any kind of way that they saw
Hmm.
fit. And do you know the price that an African leader, after snubbing his nose at another African who would have developed for us doing for ourselves, do you know how much that lease agreement was?
How much?
1 million acres
For?
leased for 99 years at, hold on while I say this, leased at 6 cents an acre for 99 years. Firestone walked into Liberia as a white man and negotiated with our own brother to lease 1 million acres
Acres.
of
My
our
God.
land. Understand that people were displaced from that land. People did not grow food they could eat on that land for 99 years for the sum total of $60,000 over the course of 99 years.
Wow.
We were up against much. And our people colonized in so many different ways, whether it's colorism, whether it is um, education, or whether it is religion. We just had a hard way of seeing ourselves as independent and living as such. And that is what made the UNIA such an important movement. That is what caused the masses to gravitate towards it, because here was an organization that preached the equality of the genders and that preached that we can be our own saviors and gave very specific information and teaching on what we needed to do. Let me share my last few words that I shared with Mr. Tolbert. It's there's so much to say. It's hard to know where to say. The point is that 8 supposedly prominent Uncle Tom Negroes wrote the federal attorney general in Washington a long letter. Did you hear me?
Yeah, a long letter.
Black people, Africans, a long letter to the federal attorney general. Remember, we were under surveillance by the FBI.
Mhm.
And they attributed to Garvey the fact that he was spreading hate amongst blacks and whites. These are African people, descendant of slaves, people who had been enslaved in the United States of America, now running to their very oppressor to say, Take out that man because he is teaching us not to grovel and kiss the feet of white men. Now, at a point in American history, do I think that any one man could go out and teach black people to hate white people? I
Certainly not.
think that all the whites have ever done and are still doing towards black people couldn't constitute love. Could it? They stated also that they asked the Attorney General to rush the case against Garvey and have him deported out of the country because he was a menace, and further, that the Attorney General should shut down the UNIA because of his hate preaching proclivities. Exterminate. That was the word they used. I hear that a brilliant young man made a documentary recently. He must have read this letter that these Uncle Toms wrote about my husband, because I understand he titled the documentary Exterminate
Yeah.
All the Brutes. Exterminate, that was the word they used. Our own black people were doing that to ourselves. Now, Garvey, my husband, realizing what would happen at any moment, because the government had within its power to close down all the branches of the UNIA, just as the government had in its power to legalize the Ku Klux Klan. You know, they also tried to shut down the NAACP. None of these tactics are new. Told people they had to state when they applied for a job whether they were a member of the NAACP. And in certain states, if you were, you could not get a job, or if you had a job, you would be dismissed. Now, this same government that had in its power to legalize the Ku Klux Klan, although they were destroying our people and burning their properties, they had the temerity to say the issue was the UNIA. So what my husband did, very astute of him, he decentralized the UNIA. That is, Garveyism was no longer confined in the vehicle of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Communities League. Any group of Garveyites, or those who adhere to the principles of Garveyism, and if you don't know what those principles are and you are a Black person, put that as your assignment. Go and study. What are the principles of Garveyism? Which ones can you embrace? And the ones you can't embrace, study and ask yourself why. Anyway, any group of Garveyites or those who adhere to the principles of Garveyism could form branches or groups or divisions, whatever they wanted to call it, so that the government could not be able to have one law or regulation that would shut all of them down. Because they weren't the UNIA. They could call themselves anything that they wanted to. We knew, but you have to be smart and outsmart your adversaries.
Yeah. Strategies.
So you will find now that there is the Ethiopian World Federation. There is the Nationalist League. There is the Tiger Club. There is the Garvey Club. There were all sorts of names, but it was Garveyism. In other words, even though they succeeded in deporting my husband after coming up with trumped-up charges against him, Garveyism was at large.
Yeah, you can kill a man, but you can kill an idea. Yeah.
Elijah Muhammad was a Legion man in the UNIA organization. Did you know that?
So the Nation
And
of
he
Islam.
went off and now started
The Nation of Islam.
his Nation of Islam movement with very similar tenets. That was all right, you see. That was the way when you are harassed and you are corralled and you are backed in a corner, you've got to think fast
Yeah.
and do things. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can't go out and run your big mouth. Decentralizing the organization. See, you people now with what do you call all your things now?
Social
Social
media.
media and things.
Yeah.
Even back then with our newspapers, everything does not need to be
Announced.
public.
Mm.
Some things you just need to do quietly behind the scenes. You don't say I'm decentralizing the organization. No, 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 no. Black folk have more sense. You know what I mean? We've been mapping out plenty strategies. I may point out that in the Black Revolution for Change, we have cadres of all different groups who operate in different ways. We don't need to fight amongst ourselves. If you have a common vision for our collective liberation, let that be good enough.
Mm.
We don't have to be the exact same. Some work in culture or art, but it is in keeping with the revolution for change in the status of the Black man, and I would say woman, all over the world. I hope that gave you just a little
Mm.
hint
Yes.
of the work we did and the strategy.
Mm.
And then I'm, well, let me share some more things and then I'll get into a little bit more of personal things about
Okay.
myself. Now, I was a writer and I was a speaker. And Amy Ashwood did have an official title, in the organization. In retrospect, perhaps I wanted to sidestep some of the issues that had strained his previous marriage. And so, although I was doing a lot of work,
Mm-hmm.
organizing and writing and using my analytical and my legal and my administrative skills, speaking and fundraising and all of that for the organization, I never held an official title. I didn't push the issue either. I felt, I could do the work and support, and it was an example to how Black women could support men because in Garveyism, we do teach that the man is the head of the household and should be providing for the household, and the woman is a helper, not less than, of course, because we believed in equality in gender. But yes, there was a lot of pushback by the patriarchy. You can say.
Mm.
Now, I married Marcus on July 27, 1922. At that point, of course, we were already being harassed by the FBI. We had a small wedding in Baltimore. And then he was imprisoned from 1925 to 1927. Of course, before the imprisonment, we had the long drawn out investigation and the arrest and the the proceedings, the court, and everything. So it was a stressful time, and in his absence,
Mm.
I was of course running the
The
organization.
organization. Okay.
But we had a group of men in the organization who had the nerve to call me a helpless woman and to assert that I in no way actively or passively ran or helped to run the organization. And we can, discuss later why this was.
Okay.
But I was raising the funds for his legal defense. I edited the woman's page of the Negro World. You know who else wrote for the Negro World that you might know?
Who
He
did?
was a good friend of ours, John Henry Clark.
Oh, the great man.
Now, with W.E.B. Du Bois, it was a different story. He's definitely, definitely a patriarch. Maybe suffered me a little bit more because I was browner, lighter skinned. But he had, I would just say, interesting views of the role of a woman. We did come to, I think, eventually, to some degree, um, have some mutual respect. But he was quite condescending to women.
Hmm.
Um, but my page, this page, the woman's page in the Negro World, emphasized the importance of Black women's leadership. You cannot talk about the freedom of our people as a collective and leave women out. Um, in my 1925 essay, Women as Leaders, many consider it a foundational work in what they now call Black feminist political thought. Of course, I did not call myself a feminist. Those were
Feminist.
not words we used at that time. If a feminist is someone who believes in the agency of women and our ability to live full and complete lives, I suppose so. But if it means anything else, and if it means fighting with my man for power, that is, don't call me a feminist. But that writing, Women as Leaders, is considered from 1925. It is considered a foundational work. And if you haven't read it, go look it up. I published, let me tell you, the extent to which people know and study my husband the way they do today. I have to be given quite a bit of the credit for it because I edited and published The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, volumes 1 and 2. I did that in 1923 and in 1925 under conditions that were quite tough given what was going on legally. But it was important to me to write
To keep a
and
record.
publish
Hmm.
what the philosophy was. Many of you today, you don't write. You have to write. You have to write. Even just a personal journal. A few sentences. Think of this. Think of this. Just thought of it. If you write half a page a day of whatever you want to write about, how your trip to the supermarket went, what your child said or didn't say, what you did at work, half a page, and you did that for a full year, how many pages do you have?
Hmm. That's a
Now
book.
imagine people later, maybe they're your biological heirs, maybe they're not. But imagine for you now, if today you could read the journal of a woman who looks like you, who lived in the let's say, the early 1900s, and you could read about a year in her life in 1910, how illuminating would that be?
Yeah. Deep insights. Deep insights.
So I also authored Garvey and Garveyism in 1963 and Black Power in America, The Power of Human Spirit in 1968. My essays and my editorials preserved the intellectual foundation of Garveyism for you and for the future until human beings no longer exist. Well, when they finally deported my husband, Of course, I left as well with him. This was in 1927. We returned to Jamaica, and we had our two sons in 1930 and 1933. Um, Marcus Mosiah Garvey III was born in 1930, and Julius Winston was born in 1933. Now, I'm going to say something that I must say I'm not very proud of, but in the spirit of teaching, I have to say this because it's important to not just learn from the achievements of those who came before you. It's important to learn from their shortcomings too.
Okay.
I did tell you that our second son's name is Julius Winston
Winston.
Garvey. My husband chose, and I did not oppose it in any way that is worth talking about. My husband chose to name our second son after Julius Caesar and Winston Churchill. In my latter years, it was helpful to me to understand how easily our conditioning sets us up to do the very things that we may say we are opposed to.
Yeah.
So when Amy Ashwood said that Marcus had called her his Josephine to his Napoleon, yes. And in fact, by the time our family, Marcus and I had returned back to Jamaica, something began to happen even within Marcus, in my opinion. And I was quite critical of him from time to time. We were both very passionate, fiery thinkers and thought leaders and speakers.
Okay.
Garvey claimed that he was the explicator of the people and understood the power inherent in that role. Certainly, the idea of us becoming the overseers for the colonies previously owned by Germany could have kind of foretold this mindset. But again, a scholar that you all may have studied or heard of, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, has suggested that intellectuals who serve as interpreters sometimes see themselves as scouts and guides in their own linguistic space, and that all too often they fall into a trap of locating power solely in those who can articulate it and failing to see the power in the people themselves. And so, a criticism of my husband at one point was that he was beginning to see himself as the cultured representative of the masses, similar to the theory of the talented tenth,
Talented
I
then.
suppose.
Yes.
And that he was beginning to assume this mindset and attitude, even though he had criticized it amongst other African American leaders. Now, upon our return to Jamaica, things were tough financially. But I did have an inheritance from my father, and that provided some ability to somewhat take care of myself and my husband and address some of the UNIA debts. Now, we had some very loyal Garveyites in the US who continued to send us money in Jamaica. In fact, they sent us a Buick, and then when the engine of the Buick went out, they sent us a Hudson. But as the depression grew in the United States.
I get
Even
you.
our most loyal members really did not have
It means.
the means to continue to give and support us. Now, I, in studying the issues of women, particularly Black women, particularly in Jamaica, I saw the burdens, the financial burdens on us. And now, as the mother of just my first child, I was also beginning to feel that pinch. I needed my husband, Marcus, to tone down his lifestyle. I had begun to change my ideas on what constituted waste and excess. And my husband was quite prone to pomp and pageantry, if you will.
Mm.
It's something that still plagues many African leaders, and it makes them very susceptible to the whims of those powers that might wine or dine them or provide means for this sometimes what I consider ostentatious lifestyle. On one occasion in 1931, after the birth of our first child, I suggested to my husband that he spend less on his personal secretaries, of which he had two. He had two personal secretaries. They reached a point in our marriage where we were actually living apart in Jamaica. He lived in a different quarters with his two secretaries, and I lived separately with my son and a maid to help because having the child around was too much of a disturbance. Now, between us and whoever might be watching or listening, I had started off as his wife's secretary,
Mm. I can see where you're going with that.
and I will leave it at that. Both secretaries were paid in US salaries in Jamaica, and they had access to a car, a major luxury since most people on the island they trekked, they walked by foot or by donkey or mule, or sometimes they hitched a ride on the back of a truck. But these two secretaries, they drove around in a car. In
Wow.
addition, Garvey gave them presents, took them out on costly outings, and after a year of employment, paid for their vacations to the United States. All of this occurred when I was frequently trying to figure out how to pay the household bills and when we were both pressed to meet organization bills. In response to my complaints, my dear husband, who is legendary nonetheless for his flaws, calmly and deliberately told me that because he received much of his financial support from the United States, the African American secretaries had to be accommodated in such a manner. And he said, I thought you realized this a long time ago.
Mm.
Money was short, and me and my son were often doing without. But my husband was unwilling to change his spending habits. We went on to have our second child, and with the birth of um, the
Mr.
second
Winston.
child, Garvey's haphazard money management didn't really change. So I changed. I began to openly criticize his pecuniary mishaps, and I would withhold from him the little inheritance I had from my father to live on. Now that me and my children were suffering, I had to go back and heed the very advice I had given other Black women on how to stretch a dollar, on how to make do. Now, my husband, the thing he loved most about me, I would say, was my hair. I had long, flowy hair, and he loved that so much about me. In fact, he wrote a piece in the
Mm.
New Jamaican on September 1st, 1932, entitled The Question of Love. It was supposed to be just a general article, not autobiographical, but let's read some of what he said. He wrote, "Love is really a personal matter. One man will love a woman because of her beautiful hair. A man marries a woman in the first instance of loving her for her hair. As the marriage develops, he may begin to realize her shortcomings physically and otherwise, not consistent with the love that the person had in the first place because of the beautiful head of hair." He then goes on to describe how a philosopher sympathetically reasons with his spouse about her repulsiveness or bad disposition as a means to reform her. If the spouse accepts the suggestions, the lover will find himself not only loving the hair of a person, but loving the person completely. But when the woman refuses to conform, then you have a variance that cannot be interpreted as law. Well, it came to a time when my husband did depart for England. Things had gotten really tough in Jamaica, and he felt that being in England would allow him to move help the organization move forward. And for all intents and purposes, I became a single mother, raising two children. Marcus went with his two secretaries with whom he lived and worked at the location they secured um, for the UNIA. So you could say that after 13 years of marriage, we had separated by choice. Of course, we stayed married till he died, and after he died, I did not remarry. Interesting that one of the things we teach in Garveyism is the man maintaining his family, but I was the one solely responsible. Now, he did send money from time to time, but nothing that I could count on.
Rely
And he
on.
would send suits for the boys. Um, Creditors began to stalk me. Bills went unpaid. On more than one occasion, I was summoned to court. I had to set up a payment plan because I could not afford the physician's bill incurred after my pregnancy. In addition to the gradual dissolution of my personal inheritance, the financial resources gleaned from the Universal Negro Improvement Association were also atrophying. So, this is a situation in which I found myself. Now, years later, Marcus was able to gather enough resources to send for us to come to the UK, which we did. But my youngest son was very sickly, and the UK air was not good at all for his lungs. And so we eventually returned to the UK, and I made that decision unilaterally because my husband, in my opinion, was not willing to do what was required for our son's health. So, unfortunately, Marcus died in 1940 in the UK. And of course, at that point, our children were just 10 and 7 years old. I am very proud of the fact that not only did I keep the memory of my husband, um,
Life.
I kept it alive, I kept the organization going, but I raised two amazing young men. One, both my sons have gone on to do incredible things in the world, and one of them, well, the surviving one, has also been instrumental in lobbying for the exoneration of well, first the pardon, I got that, but hopefully eventually the exoneration of my husband. I continued my activism by founding the African Studies Circle of the World, publishing new works, mentoring youth. I supported myself through my writing, my editing, my public speaking. And in 1963, I visited Nigeria at the invitation of President, Nnamdi Azikiwe, um, which was just a little reflection of the Pan African circles in which I traveled, because I had relationships with Julius Nyerere, with Kwame Nkrumah, and with so many others. In 1971, I received the Musgrave Medal from the Institute of Jamaica for my work. Like I indicated earlier, I did pass, I transitioned on July 25th, 1973, in Kingston, Jamaica, and I was buried at the St. Andrew's Parish Church Cemetery. Um, just 3 years ago in 2022, my gravesite was restored and a memorial was held to honor my contributions. There are several sites that commemorate my legacy. There's the Amy Jack Hall at UTech in Jamaica. There's the Amy Jack Garvey Community Center in Kingston. And there's the Jack Road in Kingston, connected to my family legacy. And back to your original question. I am a woman. I am an African woman. I was the partner for one of the greatest leaders the African world and the world has seen. I am a Pan-Africanist. I am a woman who speaks up for women's issues. I'm an editor. I'm an archivist in my own right. I'm a mentor. I'm an activist. I am an organizer. I am a visionary. I am a mother and a grandmother. And my influence, I believe, will continue to live.
Mm, yes. Um, there was you mentioned a couple of gentlemen, John Henry Clark, W.B. Du Bois. This in the Anarchos archives of histories are two great men, especially within the black space. So the
Yes.
question for you would be, in light of these titans, how did society at that time looked on the political labor of black women, led by, as you described him, one of the most charismatic black figures? And these men were no slouches as well. So how would you categorize the way they were seen? I mean, you've given us an inkling into how W.B. Du Bois saw women, but maybe was there a counterbalance, or that was just a general outlook? Then, like, women should, I don't want to put words into it.
I would say that was the prevailing outlook.
Mm,
Um, When people have been oppressed in the way that we have, and when our men, and I mean our African men, see the power wielded by white men and certainly wielded over white women, there's a tendency to unfortunately see that as the
Standards.
yes, and to hold your head up and be as manly as the white man, you also have to have that subordinate spouse or helpmate, so to speak. And I didn't balk at the role women must play as nurturers, play in the home, play in supporting their husbands, but I also very much believed, and the UNIA had this understanding in theory anyway about the equality of the genders, that women had a lot to offer, as much as any man, and that we needed opportunities to fully express our individuality as well, fully express our personalities, our intellect.
Mm.
Certainly, having the woman's arm, if you will, allowed us to take on some of those leadership opportunities. But many of the men, I think, preferred for us to be like children, seen but not heard.
Mm.
They did not mind the work we did to advance the cause, but not to be up out front and not to take much credit. And so, in fact, your viewers, your listeners may know of a story of a time when Marcus, my husband, was going to be speaking, and it was a large crowd. And I was not anywhere on the
On the
program in
billing.
terms of
Yeah.
speakers, yes. But the people, men and women, um, demanded, asked so loudly that I too be allowed to speak, that I ended up speaking that day. And some will say, well, might have been the most engaging speaker. Um, I think that was a point of contention between Amy Ashwood and my husband. And I continue to find ways to own who I was,
Mm.
and at the same time not ruffle too many feathers unnecessarily.
So, with that
But
said,
John Henry Clark, I liked him. It worked very well with him. He had a different understanding. In fact, if I recall, he would say things like, the black woman is God.
mm,
And that was refreshing at that time, yes.
okay. So, with that said, you said
And of
men.
course, I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
Mary McLeod Bethune was being, dismissed in that way. There were many, Mary Church Terrell, many of the women of that time who were activists, who were working, were often minimized and dismissed by the men.
So, can we attribute that mindset to why uh, we haven't really truly achieved liberation? If indeed our movements, our mindsets just replicated the same structures of gender oppression that we seek to resist in the broader society.
Well, I wouldn't attribute it just to that. That is certainly one of the issues. The greater issue, I think, being I wouldn't even, I used to call it white supremacy. I wouldn't even call it that. I will call it the very real inferiority of white people that is eating them up from the inside,
Mm.
that causes them to want to subjugate and control the entire world. I think that is the first major obstacle or challenge that or demon that we are faced with. Now, when you couple that with an education that causes us to love our oppressors, whether it's through religion or through the books or even now through the culture. Um, for instance, my husband being as thrilled as he was about my hair, as opposed to the coarser hair of his first wife, who was much darker skinned than I was. So there are layers to the issues affecting us. Definitely fascism, this white sense of inferiority that fuels all their fear would be at the helm. I would definitely put the patriarchy right next to it. And then definitely this notion of imperialism and capitalism. Because even when you now get Black people into positions, they want to lord it over others. So our challenges are layered.
So yes, one final question. Um, you mentioned she did travel to Nigeria and
Hmm.
met with Nnamdi Azikiwe, who happened to be the first president, ceremonial president of Nigeria. What lessons can you say people seeking to build Pan-African frameworks learn from Miss Amy's efforts during her time within the UNIA, considering she practically ran the organization while the husband was incarcerated?
So I would say this, that from when you have a child, no one is quite, I mean, some of us are clairvoyant, but no one is quite certain what path that child will take. But I'll tell you that my father had me reading papers, had me learning about the world beyond the one in which I lived in. And all of those experiences as a child allowed me to have the critical thinking skills and the ability to understand that it's not just what I could see, there was a lot more going on. So, one of the lessons I would say is that I could impart to those who may want to continue in the work that my husband and I did is you have to be informed. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is what has us sign a 99-year lease
Yes, yeah,
of 1,000,000 acres
6 cents.
of the land of your people for 6 cents an acre. If perhaps he had a better understanding of imperialism and what the people he was forming ties with had done to other communities and how they had decimated them, or even had paid attention to the issues within Liberia itself. Can you imagine what a partnership with UNIA could have brought about as opposed to the partnership with Firestone?
Mm,
We have so many of these opportunities where just one decision can take us in a totally different place, right? So you look at the idea of the United States of Africa and how some of us oppose that. What would happen if we had in that moment
embrace that. Yeah.
embraced that?
Mm,
But we will never know now. And so many decades where we could have been marching in a different way. Would it be possible then to destabilize Libya in the way it has been destabilized?
mm.
Would it be possible to get Western Sudan now to take deportees from America? We will never know.
Mm.
We will never
Mm.
know. So We need to learn our
Mm.
history. We need to study what has been going on historically with us. We need to understand that we are not monolithic. And so unity does not mean that we are always of one thought, although the overarching
Goal.
peace has to be our liberation.
Yeah.
Now, that might look different from different people, but what it cannot be is one group lording it over another, whether it's men over women, or rich over quote unquote poor, or light skinned over darker skin, or darker skin. There's got to be that unity, that equality. Um, I would say what I also learned is to forge relationships across the expanse, not just in one place. Um, so those are just a few things that I would say. And then, of course, you must write. You must write. You
Yeah.
must write and
Speaking,
disseminate your information. Write and disseminate your information.
I did
Yes.
say that was my last question, but obviously you did just mention writing now. Are there any writings that you would advise people to take on with regards to some of your writings, the books,
Oh, they absolutely have to start with the philosophy of Garveyism. You have to know that first. The
volumes one and
opinions
two?
and yes, that would be a good place to start.
Okay.
Um, there are many articles. Like I said, I contributed. A lot of my articles are in the Negro world that are at the Schomburg. Um, but I would start with the philosophy of
Of God.
Garveyism, because more than what you want to learn about me, what I am interested in is recruiting people into the movement, because the
Mm.
movement must not die. Yes.
Yes, and speaking of must not die, hopefully this podcast has given people a new lease of life. And in the course of doing this, we've come to learn about the movements and the thoughts of very incredible women. And the journey continues. Next week, it's going to be the lives and times of Nina Simone. So, I mean,
Defecating on your microphone.
exactly. So hopefully there will be none of that. But yes, it's been a very, very insightful conversation. And again, we've learned that when it comes to the interaction of men and women within our space, oftentimes than not, our own internal dynamics have impeded what we should have achieved, but on the course to hopefully with our understanding and also reading, reflecting would give us a better insight of what has happened and how to avoid them going forward. So,
Yes.
speaking of going forward, do you have any famous last words for us?
Get ready for Nina.
Yes, Nina Simone is going to be next week. And yes, it's been one remarkable insight into the lives and times of Amy Jack Garvey. We do apologize. There was a slight technical issue when we first of all started that we had to take care of. But hopefully, oh, uh,
She wants to know how we two met. I,
which
I
two?
I don't know if she's talking about Marcus Garvey and I,
Yeah,
as in Amy Jack Garvey. Is that the question?
I'll give her a couple of minutes to complete it.
Well, if that's the question, I'll answer that, and then we'll see if that's the question or not. But
Yeah.
yes, definitely, I met him after hearing him speak at an event. As I said, stated earlier, Amy Ashwood and I became friends, and um, I got to know him better through her, and then he hired me as her personal assistant, and then I also began to assist him as well. Oh, she wants to know
Oh.
how. Okay. Well, it was the pandemic of 2020, and a friend of mine was starting a program where he was going to just teach on Africa and Black people and our
Mm,
history and our culture and all of that on YouTube. And I tuned in, and you can tell your story, but I think you tuned in at some point,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and we ultimately became part of a group that some of you may know if you sign up for Narrative with a KKNARRATIVE. You can then become part of another forum that is called Nubia, KNUBIA. And it was in that forum that I met um, our host here at SOG, because he is an avid reader and was quite outspoken in the chat, and also so happens to be from the area that I'm from as well. We can trace our people back to that same area, even though it's different ethnic groups.
mm,
And that is how we started to interact in a group that read books together and discussed ideas. And I shared that I was working on a book on women who are sometimes overlooked, but I wanted to put it in the form of, I'm not going to say what I was going to put it in the form as, because someone is probably listening and going to take my idea before I implement it. But at any rate, I shared that idea with him, and he came up with Women and Resistance, and here we are. Do you want to add anything to that?
yes. Other than okay, you did allude to the movement. Yes, and for people who are not conversant, you can actually watch um the program In Class with
That's
Car
what
on
I'm.
Saturdays on YouTube,
Mhm.
where you would get an understanding of how this idea itself, you know, you know, had its humble beginnings, because the man was just, you know, again, it started in the pandemic. The man just mentioned one word. I was about to make coffee, and the man mentioned what's his name
Chinua
again?
Achebe.
Chinua Achebe. Things fall apart. I was like, okay, what do you know about him? And then, as they say, the rest is history. I met the good sister here physically. I think it was in DC. Yeah, it was
DC at Baraka's event.
Baraka's event. Yeah,
Yes.
the New Jersey's
Mayor.
mayor. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So that was where we first of all met, and
Yes.
shall we say, a couple of groups, reading groups. I mean, there's enough to make a story out of that, but the focus is on
So, so
women.
anyone who wants to be part of a group that reads and studies people like Ayiko Aman, Gugu Wationgo, we've
Mm.
done so many different authors. Let Adesoji know.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So you could, yeah, yeah. I mean, you're more than welcome to join us. So again, it's growth in itself. I mean,
Hmm.
we you don't just read the books. You read the books and you discuss with uh individuals who might have a different take on the book you've just read, but then you
Yep.
come to some sort of understanding that there is more than one way to skin a cat, as they would say. And
Yep.
so, speaking of, hopefully we're not, I love the way you crack. You try not to laugh out loud. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. That's true. It means you've been you've been focused.
Only when I have some outrageous costume on. Maybe with Nina. We'll see. We'll see
Yeah,
how Nina wants to present herself, because sis was all of that.
yeah, yeah. A whole lot of jazz. And yes.
So
It's
I'm gonna sign off.
yeah, it's been one remarkable experience. And
It is.
again, hopefully we'll see you all next week. And thank you all for coming. And good night. Good night.
Good night, everyone.